David says go, so I'm going to go. Good afternoon. My name's Nicole Wong, and I am a former deputy CTO for the White House, as is my co-conspirator here, Andrew McLaughlin, who was actually the first deputy CTO. So we were going to come and talk today about the view of Silicon Valley, or the tech sector generally, from the West Wing, and vice versa. And timely, since POTUS was just here, so we can talk a little bit about some of the things he covered, or how policy gets made from the White House perspective.
So we should say you went to the White House by way of?
Google. So I was at Google for 8 years, and then leading their product council team and some other regulatory areas, and then at Twitter, leading their products. And you had a
Same thing. I didn't go to Twitter, but I Googled the White House. So we both went from Silicon Valley into the White House, right, and then back.
Started on the same day at Google, by the way, which was awesome.
So what we thought would be interesting to talk about a little bit maybe was what that was like. One of the things that you often hear people say is that government should run more like a business. Government should learn more from Silicon Valley. And I think that's at least 50% BS, and maybe we can talk about why that is, and really what it's like once you get on the inside.
Well, so why don't you start, since you were there first administration, first time the White House had ever had a CTO and a deputy CTO. So maybe you can talk a little, A, why did you go? Like, knowing how slow government works, why did you go? And B, what was it like to be in the White House at that time?
Yeah, so I first went to join the transition team. So this is 3 floors of an incredibly colorless and boring office building in downtown Washington that houses somewhere around 150 to 180 staff people who are basically working on a series of binders for the people who are going to be taking office in the new White House. So you have teams that go look at agencies, they write up what's going on, and I worked on, broadly, a government reform portfolio. So how do you make the government work better? And the idea was we would come up with ways where the new administration could operationally run the federal government in a more effective way, and try to learn some of the things, and import some of the things that we felt like American industry had learned how to do over the last couple of decades in running large organizations. And so for 3 months, we put together this very sort of like, I thought, ambitious and detailed set of proposals for how the president could have an operating hand on the million-plus domestic civilian employees of the federal government and try to direct them around his agenda. And it was completely thrown in the trash can and sort of rejected out of hand, in part because the sentiment among the president's senior staff going into the new administration was, and it's easy to forget what this was like now, the country is in a near depression, we're in a massive financial free fall, we've got 2 wars going on, and nobody here has any appetite to do a reorganization of the federal government or even the White House, maybe someday. And I think one lesson that we've learned is that maybe someday never happens. If you're going to do big structural changes in the way that you run the White House, it happens at the beginning of your administration or not at all. And for better or worse, we still run the White House basically the way that we did in the Truman administration. Same structures, same offices, with a couple of exceptions. One of those exceptions was the CTO function. So the one thing that we did pull off in this team was persuading the White House to carry through on a promise that Barack Obama made in Silicon Valley in October of 2007, which was, if he became president, he would appoint a chief technology officer. So I actually took the job before they knew who the CTO was going to be. And that was because I had been on the transition, I thought long and hard about whether to go back to Google or stay, and I got swept up in the moment. I mean, I'm a big Obama guy, I love him, I think he's a great president, and had a lot of hopes for him at the time, and so I just wanted to be a part of it. It was that simple. So let's fast forward to 4 years. So why did you make the call, and what did it look like when you showed up?
So first of all, you get a call and it's the White House, and I literally, my knees buckled. I had to sit down because I had never gotten a call from the White House, and I was like,
I never called you?
No, how could you not call me? Other than to tell me the food sucked and there were fluorescent lights above you, I don't think I ever heard from you.
I'm pretty sure I called you, and you didn't react that way, but again.
But so the call I got came in, I think, January of 2013. And I'll tell you, I had just lost my grandfather, so I'm a fourth generation Chinese American. My grandfather had been a community organizer. He had worked on the immigration bill in the 60s, and I had just given his eulogy, which was to say, if anything that I learned from him is we have a right to participate in our community and our government, and if we get the opportunity, it's our responsibility and our privilege to do so. So having just given this talk, this eulogy, with all of my kids and the grandkids present, like I felt like I now have a call that I now have to take and take the opportunity to go and serve. And so it was as sort of that moment of saying, this is it. I do think, and I say this to other folks who are in the tech sector, we have no right to complain about the policies that come out of Washington unless we show up. Like, why would we expect them to know how to make good policy about how to run the internet? Why would we expect them to know how to make good policy over anything that has to do with how bits move or don't move or are protected if actual technologists don't show up? So I think that there is something to that as well.
So, now having showed up, let's complain.
Yes. Totally.
All right,
So not like Schoolhouse Rock and the bill sitting on Capitol Hill, like not at all like that. Anyway.
So let's set up one contrast. So when I showed up, the portfolio that we had, the job that we specifically had at different times was around internet policy, technology policy, more broadly. So when I showed up, the big issues were the stimulus bill and the money that had been set aside in 3 different pots. This is what got put on my plate. Broadband stimulus. So this was a bunch of money. So if you remember the stimulus bill, this was somewhere just shy of $1 trillion. It was basically all of the domestic discretionary spending that the Obama administration was going to get to do in its first term. And it had been passed even before he took office, because Congress is sworn in early January, the president is sworn in on the 20th, and they passed this big bill with the support of the last administration because the economy was going into the tank. So there was this sense that we needed to spend a lot of money. One chunk of it was for broadband networks. So this was run through the Commerce Department and the Department of Agriculture, interestingly, and was a joint program to spend a bunch of money connecting libraries, building middle networks, and the big concern was that it would be squandered or wasted. And so this was almost like an oversight function of making sure that that process went well, that the deadlines were met, that the money was spent transparently and well. Second pot was health IT. So this was a huge $20 billion pot of money that basically goes through the Medicare, Medicaid, and VA reimbursement systems. And it says to doctors' offices that up until 2017, I think you get extra money if you use personal health records and you make meaningful use of information technology. And after 2017, you're going to start to get penalized. But it was sort of like topping up money to move people more quickly. And then there was a whole bunch of policy work that flowed from that, which was standardization. Basically, can we get everybody to agree on a single common standard for personal health records so that the information can be shared and distributed through the system. And then the last one was called Smart Grid. So this was basically putting money to work, adding packets to electrical networks so that you basically can understand what's happening in your electricity grid in real time and reduce costs and so forth. So those were my 3 bits. So we had that, and then eventually sort of cybersecurity crept in because the FBI started pushing for, in very interestingly relevant way, they started resurfacing a decades-long push to try to get design authority over U.S. technology, particularly on encryption. But this was a pretty theoretical matter back then. It was something that they were concerned about. All right, so that's what it looked like when I showed up. So you showed up, what was it like?
So I showed up 6 days after the Snowden disclosures started.
So this is when he's like on a plane to Hong Kong or something?
So I was like, awesome, this will be fun. Healthcare.gov happened in October after I arrived, which was like that mix of an important policy mission where like we literally got let down by a technical infrastructure, right? So for every time that you think, if you were a government agency and your whole vision on technology was like, that's that IT guy sitting in the corner, he like sets up your email for you. All of a sudden, like oh, actually, no, this is about to keep 20 million people from getting healthcare for the first time. And then net neutrality was the third one that was like a big thing during my...
Although you during your tenure there, you produced a very big report on yet another subject.
We had big data, because big data was a thing. So like, just to put context into that, right? We spent, I think my first 6 months in the administration was literally about the snow disclosures and trying to figure out what our government would or wouldn't do with respect to signals intelligence. And it was I think a real effort, which capped with the president making a speech on January 27th about what we would or wouldn't do as a government in terms of signals intelligence. And the president asked for a small working group that was led by John Podesta to look at big data generally. So bear in mind, right, signals intelligence and the questions we were talking about were about like taking all of the metadata from your phone records and using that for intelligence purposes. It's a big data project. The federal government actually committed like $200 million to big data research already. That's me. And so now needed to think about what are the policy implications of using big data in the commercial sector, in the public sector, or privately. Is this a microphone issue? I'll just keep talking and you can tell me if you hear me or not. So one of the projects we worked on...
Just use the hand mic?
Okay. One of the projects we worked on... Better?
Yay!
All right. So one of the projects we worked on was like, what are the policy implications of big data? How should we use it? How should it be used in education? How should it be used in transportation? How should it be used in healthcare? And that's been a great.
So with an eye towards the next president, right? So whenever President Trump is inaugurated, let's talk about what basically like what we would say to the next president. And I think a good starting point is the healthcare.gov debacle.
Yeah.
Right, that was a complete catastrophe, and one that I think it's important to learn lessons from. So one thing that happened in the second term was that debacle was really a kind of like hitting of rock bottom, in the White House. Like the technology had been so mismanaged and so ignored that it caused the president, most importantly, to really focus energy and say, like, what are we doing here? How did this get to be so bad? One consequence of that is that he really bonded with a former Google colleague of ours named Mikey Dickerson, who had been brought in as part of like a strike team to fix the site reliability. And the president got the idea that he should keep this guy around and build an organization around him of technologists that can go in and tackle urgent, pressing problems with a high level of technical sophistication. This is something called the U.S. Digital Service. It started off as just a pod of staff people that were cobbled together with interagency transfers, and now is like a formally budgeted unit of the White House that I think will live beyond this administration, and it's awesome. But it really is a response to, kind of like waking up in the gutter one morning, and like wondering how you got there.
So I think they were moving on the trajectory, and the failure of healthcare.gov caused them to move faster and caused them to institutionalize in a way that was super important to like continue embedding people within the agencies, because it's at the end of the day it's the agencies that have to say yes, not just the White House says you must go do X.
That's right. Although I question whether it needs to be that way, but that is the system that we the sort of and the culture that we have right now, which the White House doesn't tell the agencies what to do. Although me and Dick Cheney see eye to eye on whether the White House should have a lot more directive authority over the executive branch.
All right. So bottom line, what would you ask the next administration to do?
So here's the big. I think the big lesson is. It is a mistake to populate your White House entirely with policy people doing policy work on the domestic side. Now, so just to like elaborate what I mean by this a little bit, I think President Obama is a fantastic wartime commander-in-chief. Part of the reason that he's good at doing war command and control is that there's an apparatus that exists to surface decisions, flesh out options. And I mean, to be clear, he got, really duped by some generals early in his White House, and he had to learn how to overcome that. But he's really good at interrogating options finding out where he doesn't have enough information and then applying judgment. The problem is, and then the military and the intelligence agencies execute his decisions. The problem on the domestic side is that none of that exists. There is no apparatus. You have to really drive it, and you have to be operational. And so when it comes to technology, I think the idea of a more directive capability out of the White House is really important. So what I would want the next chief technology officer to do, or to be, is strong technologist. The current one right now, Megan Smith, is absolutely fantastic as a real internet technologist. So I think you need to carry that forward, and then you need to build a structure where the White House can actually, get things done in a more directive way. So, that's it. The issue with healthcare.gov, like what that surfaced was that nobody was in charge.
Yeah.
It was nobody's job. Nobody was in charge of making that happen. It was literally like a deputy CIO in HHS that was a contracting officer, and that was the closest thing we had to a responsible official.
And then my boss, the CTO at the time that I got there, Todd Park, basically created a strike team built from like the smartest people we could find in government and the smartest people we could find in the private sector to go and fix this as quickly as possible. I agree with you on not having only policy people in the White House. I hope that that's a past thing. And here's the reason why. I think in the landscape of where we are as a country, I actually view us as at the beginning of building the infrastructure that is a technical infrastructure and a data infrastructure that we are sort of going to build the productivity and life quality of Americans going forward. And that demands not just the policy people, but policy people paired with technical people. Because I don't think the technology people will get it and the political ramifications of what they, and the social ramifications of what they build without the policy people at issue, right? The issues around when you build it, where do you build it? Does that result in greater or lesser economic equality for people, right? Those types of questions, I think, are embedded in how we build the next set of structures. And so, I would want the next administration to be pairing people or finding someone who has those backgrounds to start building out the next set.
Well, I think one of the things we both saw was what the deeply touching but also hilarious reaction of real technologists that you bring into the government, and they suddenly encounter their first interagency working group process, and within a week are
ready to
teetering
leave
on
the
the brink of suicide or quitting or whatever, because the sort of the human dynamic of getting things done is so broken. I think if there's one habit that is to be broken, it's that it's very consistent, and this is just true. I mean, I could try to sugarcoat it, but a lot of people in the federal government view achievement as a series of meetings. As long as you spin up a process where there's a lot of meetings happening, meetings with the outside world, meetings with industry, meetings with other governments on a particular topic, then that's progress. And maybe legislation could be an output. And the one thing that I think the government could learn from Silicon Valley, not just many parts of the US economy have learned how to function well, but it's that getting things done is different from passing legislation, is measurable and achievable if you manage against that. And what we typically manage against is conversation, process, memos, research papers, all kinds of work product. But in an area of technology, what you need is to be deploying, for example, what would it take to deploy a mobile app that gives you a window onto your Social Security checks, a window onto tax deadlines, and you're in the context of your own account, and all those kinds of things. It's something we've learned how to do at the scale of large multinational banks. Surely the U.S. government can pull it off, but it can't pull it off unless it's got operational, directional leadership out of the White House, which I think is something we've been missing.
I totally agree with you. For God's sake, stop doing the meetings thing. Some meetings, but not as many as they have. But I actually think, here's what I thought was so stark to me is that Washington could take a page from the tech sector, which is the embracing of iteration and risk, which is to say, Agile development is really hard for them to conceive of, right? This notion of I'm going to put it out, I know it's not perfect, it'll fail, I've got a plan, we'll get it, and we'll iterate, and we'll get it better every single time. The notion of pilot testing and then broadening, all of that stuff which we learn in software so well, we do terribly in government, and it causes us to be too conservative in what we try to achieve. So you think that you have to have a beautiful end product that will last us for 25 years. Nothing lasts for 25 years in this space, so stop pretending you're going to build that thing. Build the thing that will get you to your point, actionable stuff that we can do today, and then figure out a team that will know how to iterate on that, and a policy process around that.
Although we should just say why that's so hard, a great example of why that's so hard, one of the early things that was launched in connection with the stimulus bill was a website called recovery.gov. So this was about a year in, and the idea was that all of the money that had been spent through the stimulus bill would be searchable. You could find out where every dollar went. And of course, at $900 billion and God knows how many grants and so forth, there were some coding errors in the data. And so, maybe they just said like launch early, like we'll fix it later. There was a little place where you could click and say this seems inaccurate, like tell us about it, and then all the things that you're supposed to do for that kind of iterative muscle. But Fox News literally spent like 36 hours of wall-to-wall coverage on some miscoded zip codes that put some things happening in Arizona that were clearly not in Arizona, and that's because they were desperate to try to tell a story about squandering, fraud, abuse, or whatever out of the stimulus bill, and it made everybody in the White House just be like, well, we trusted you people to like just get the data out there and see what would happen, and now we're getting hammered for it, and now people are going to believe that we're wasting the money, so, terrible experience all around.
I think it's a media thing. I think it's a public, the public can't jump up all and down when it doesn't come out right the first time. They have to help and lean into helping it make it right? And I don't think we're used to that yet as a cultural mindset. I think we're supposed to, we've probably gotten
we're done.
Time.
Yeah?
Are we supposed to?
Sure, it's up to you.
Do I hand over?
All right. Or not.
And if there's questions, I can pass mic.
Or we can take questions offline. That's totally fine.
All right. I
Thank
guess
you.
We'll do it offline. Thank you very much. Oh, we got a question.
You've articulated all these reasons why the tech sector and culture doesn't work well in the government. Everything from fluorescent lighting and bad food in the EOB to healthcare disasters. But there are all these efforts that you're talking about integration and getting leadership into the White House with knowledgeable tech people. Is that integration essential, or does it make sense to keep the tech sector working on the outside of that fluorescent lighting, outside of that government policy-centered base, and input it and contract it from the outside?
So U.S. Digital Services, which is the sort of executive arm that identifies priorities to bring new infrastructure in. They had a choice on how long should a person be appointed to USDS, and they, for a bunch of really technical reasons, it was like you can't do more than 4 years, and they're like, ooh, should we only have 4 years as a term, like you term out after that? And they actually decided yes, and actually they're looking for ways to bring in people on shorter terms, and the reason is, in this case, what sometimes they refer to as the revolving door, it benefits us. It benefits us to bring in people who are doing the cutting edge technology and bring them into government and then send them back out to learn again, right? So I think there's a deliberate decision to not have sort of established bureaucrats who never leave government, but to actually have a continuing flow of new talent.
I think the reason why you want really good technologists in government is we had this mantra that we tried to spread everywhere, which is technology doesn't solve any problem, but it's part of the solution to every problem, right? Every single thing the government is doing is made better if it has clueful use of technology. And so either you want the government to be, sort of operating with one arm tied behind its back because it doesn't really understand how to implement good tech, or not. And so I think it's in our interest as taxpayers to have A-grade talent working on this stuff because you leverage money so much farther when you do it well technologically. All of the interfaces between citizens and government, business and government, the way government manages procurement, the way that it operates everything from highways to Veterans Administration hospitals, it works a ton better and you get more bang for your buck if it's got good tech.
I agree with that entirely.
Yeah, the question is whether the culture is too institutionalized. Oh. I think it's both. Just because of the integration issues. And also, frankly, like when you have folks within an agency, think about like the Veterans Administration, which needs help in spades. Like, you want someone who's an advocate for you within the administration, right, within that agency, who understands the systems and is partnering maybe with outside folks, but also like is working it up the internal chain to get buy-in on like, yeah, we're gonna totally redo this entire thing. And that's an internal person, probably not an external person. Cool.
All right, thank you all.
Questions? Thank you. Thank you both.
Check, check, check.